Imagine this, I was 20 years old at the time. We get called to the house. The wife's called us because the husband's having chest pain. Sure enough, he's having a full-blown heart attack. Trying to tell him, hey, you need to go to the hospital. We can't afford the ambulance. We can't go, this and that. And I was like, sir, you really need to go. And I could see him starting to get agitated and really didn't want to worsen it, because the stress level increasing. And of course we can't make them go because that's kidnapping. So what we end up doing is, you get like a refusal or no transport. And I just strongly encourage, hey, get your wife to take you if you're not going to take us because you're having a heart attack. And he's like, well, I'll see if I get better. Sir, I was like, I can't make you go. I said, but I strongly advise you to go. Yeah. And, I said, just please go for your family. That's the last thing I said to him. Okay. Less than 30 minutes later, we get called back. Open the door. Right by the front door, he's laying on the floor. His 16-year-old son's doing CPR. Jesus. And I can't say that him, we transported him, he would have lived. Yeah. But he sure as hell would have had a fighting chance.
Yeah. Welcome to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Healthcare is broken, and we aim to fix it one conversation at a time.
Any pro that, you ask that is both 300s, they'll say there's some luck involved with it.
Sure.
You probably have 2 or 3 shots that easily could have gone another way. And there's other times too, you throw a perfect final shot for that 300 and you leave like a 7-pin for me, which is like the back left corner.
So if you left 1 pin on that final frame, what does that score be?
299.
299. Damn it.
299 if it's your so you get your first 2 strikes on the 10th
so
and then last one.
It's only 1. Okay, damn.
Yeah, it's 299.
How often is a 300 bowled in a tournament setting? Is it still pretty rare?
It's not very often.
It's not
very often.
Okay.
So actually the other day it happened twice in the same tournament, same day. But that was the first time in, I think, like 10 years that I saw that's happened.
Okay. So I guess my naivety about bowling is I just presume once you're at that level, 300s were a common occurrence. Okay.
Because the thing is in tournaments, so this is really getting into it, but
I want to hear it. Yeah, I want to hear it.
So getting into tournaments, the oil patterns they put on the lane gets really tricky. Oh. So you have to try to figure out what that oil pattern is. And then as play goes on, think about balls. The ball's rolling over the oil is pushing the oil too, one direction or the other.
Scratch. We're not talking about MASA. We're gonna go. All bowling. I'm gonna do a special bonus bowling episode. Well, at lunch after this, I want to keep going into the bowling. I presume and maybe we'll keep that. Maybe I'll just start the podcast off with all the bowling stuff. But in the interest of the purpose of the podcast today, so I'm with Will Winters of MASA. Am I saying it MASA right? Or what
MASA,
does that stand?
I say MASA. Some people say MASA. It just really kind of depends. But
and what does that acronym stand for?
Medical Air Services Association.
Okay, so we're going to talk about air transport and ground transport for emergency situations, right? That's mostly what you guys do. Never covered the subject at all. I'm really fascinated because there's a million things I don't know that I'm curious to dig into. But Will, before we do that, why don't you talk to me about who you are? We already got some of the bowling stuff. I may get into a little bit more bowling just to make sure we get it into the podcast because it is fascinating. But give me your background, Mel. Where'd you grow up? What brought you here today?
Awesome, man. And hey, I appreciate, the opportunity to be here, right? And,
my pleasure, man. Yeah, absolutely.
And big fan of yours, and definitely you're doing a great thing with these podcasts. So,
cool.
Keep it up, man.
Appreciate you.
So, I guess about me, like any kid growing up, especially any boy, you want to be that doctor, you want to be that firefighter, you want to, be the astronaut, whatever it may be. For me, it was to be a doctor. And I always wanted to be a doctor, and there's just something about that just fascinated me. So as I was growing up, kind of
How old were you when you had this idea that I wanted to be a doctor?
I think I was probably honestly 5 or 6.
Oh, okay.
It was early on that I was like, hey, I want to be a doctor.
Cool.
And so, there's pictures of me walking around like, a little scrub outfit, costume type thing. That was my thing. I want to be a doctor.
Cool.
And whenever I got to probably junior high, early, kind of high school, freshman, sophomore year of high school, I was going to the next level with this. Okay. I was like, I just don't want to be a doctor. I want to be the best doctor. I want everybody to know who I am, whether it's a trauma surgeon or an ER doc, whoever it is, like basically a world renowned, right?
Okay.
And it's just one of those things that's the path that I thought I was going to go down.
Okay.
And it wasn't until my junior year of high school that I got introduced to our shop teacher. Kind of an odd combination there, right?
Yeah.
But one of my teachers kind of knew the direction I wanted to go in the healthcare. Come to find out that shop teacher is also a part-time paramedic.
Okay.
And so, I started developing a relationship with him, and he became a mentor to me on many different levels. And he encouraged me my senior year to go ahead and say, just go and take an EMT basic class. our senior year because we had the opportunity to.
So you could do that in your high school?
In the high school, cool. through the high school, but it's through the community college.
Okay.
So I was like, heck, why not? Let's get after it. It doesn't hurt anything. Mm-hmm. So I went ahead and did that. And then as I was doing that, I was sitting there thinking, I kind of like this. And so the whole doctor dream started kind of slowly fading away.
Was it because the immediacy of being able to go into kind of practicing as an EMT? Was it just the learning curve, or if you will, the time needed to do that? Or
I think it was more the adrenaline rush.
Okay, yeah.
Honestly, I think that's what really started attracting me initially to it.
Okay.
And the fact that you didn't have to, I guess you said a little more immediacy too. You didn't have to go through medical school. You didn't have to do all this. Plus, you had a lot of autonomy because there's nobody else there but you.
Yeah.
So you're, in essence, although you can't technically diagnose, you're basically diagnosing.
Okay.
And treating the patient accordingly, right? And to me, I think that's what I got a little rush off of. Yeah. And so after I graduated high school, I was like, mind you, I was only 17 when I graduated, but I was able to take the state test. I just couldn't be certified till I actually turned 18.
Okay.
But then I found this class it was an intermediate, now they call it EMT advanced, and paramedic combination class. So you go straight through to get your paramedic. But you had to have your basic first. Okay. So I was sitting there, I was like, I wonder if I can get in this. So I just really petitioned heavily the course coordinator and got the approval to do it.
Yeah.
So I got to start when I was 17 because I already know I passed my test.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do any clinicals or anything like that until I turned 18, for the additional stuff. And, I ended up taking my medic test 2 months after I turned 19, or 3 months after I turned 19, and found out I passed it. I mean, this is back in the day. You still had to do like Scantron.
Oh, I remember Scantrons with the
I
number
was like,
2
oh
pencil,
my goodness.
Right? Yeah.
And you're sitting there, there's like 200 questions on this test. And doing old Scantron.
Did you find you obviously had a passion for it? Did you find you also had sort of like a proficiency for it? Like you understood the material? Like you were you passionate enough where you wanted to study and learn it and
Yeah, I felt like I was fortunate enough. I kind of picked it up quickly too.
Okay. Yeah.
And I got really big into the cardiology portion of it, and of course the trauma aspect of it. And it's just one of those things that kind of came naturally to me. I think obviously I had to learn a lot still.
Yeah.
But I had the passion behind it, right? And so I wanted to learn it.
Well, you were talking about growing up as wanting to be a doctor, right? And you were talking emergency style medicine or trauma. The adrenaline side of it, were you excited about the fact that like you would be in some very intense situations? Was that appealing to you as a young man, or did you just think, oh, maybe that just comes with the territory of what I want to do?
I don't know.
This podcast is brought to you by True Captive Insurance, a premier medical stop-loss captive for employer groups ranging from 25 to 1,000 employees. True Captive believes in healthcare that is personal and insurance that isn't complicated. That's why they take a white glove approach, making it easy for employer groups to transition into a program built specifically for them. Check them out at truecaptive.com. This podcast is sponsored by PlanSight. PlanSight is a technology for employee benefits brokers to more efficiently manage their RFP process for any group size, all funding types, and over 20 benefit lines and point solutions. PlanSight is the only end-to-end RFP technology on the market today. Let's modernize your RFP process together. Check us out at plansight.com.
I don't know if it was so much appealing to those intense situations in a sense, but it's more or less, I felt like I was making a difference.
Cool.
And looking back, I think that's a lot of the reason the dream of being a doctor, right, was to make a difference and have that lasting impact on somebody or something. And so I had another channel, if you may, to kind of go through and do that. And, it's funny, I was thinking about this actually the other day, and because with my recent birthday and stuff, I was
40, right?
Yeah. 40.
Can we disclose? I'll be 40 rolling with you, so I feel like it's okay.
40, man. I hit that threshold somehow. So,
how's it feel? Did everything fall apart?
It did immediately. I woke up the next day. I was like, oh goodness.
Oh God, well, I'm terrified now.
You're in for it.
Yeah.
No, man, I feel fortunate, feel very blessed in my life and the different things I've gone through and just the different opportunities for it. So, each year I have, I'm very, very blessed from that standpoint, and just excited to live it to.
Well, amen to that. And you were talking to me. We were kind of getting in your backstory beforehand, and you were talking to me about the why, the motivation, what you do now. I don't want to skip over too much because you spent a number of years as an emergency medical technician. That's what EMT stands for.
Correct.
I want to get that right. And then you told me about some events, right, that maybe kind of catapulted you to go a different direction. But so you were 19, you started, you're a medic, then you went back to school, right? You went back to Tech and actually did undergrad in Lubbock at Tech, correct?
Yeah, so after working as a medic for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, realized that I was enjoying what I was doing, but I really needed to find some other avenue to kind of eventually transition to at some point, because honestly, being a medic is not an old man's job by any means. Especially the hours you work, the very physical intensiveness behind it. And so I knew that at some point I was going to have to make that change. And so I wanted to be able to really prepare myself for it. And grow up loving Tech, and I ended up there for family reasons and stuff. And I was like, hell, here's my opportunity. So went all out and was able to
go. So you were still working full time and going to school, man.
I was.
I mean, so how many hours were you putting in between both of those things a day?
Well, I'd say because of the shifts that the medics work, typically you're looking at a 24-hour shift, or when I was working as a flight medic, it's still a 24-hour shift. And so I was able to work my schedules between work and school. So I did all my classes, say, for example, on a Tuesday and Thursday. And then I worked the other days of the week, basically, doing 24-hour shifts. So I was ranging anywhere from 70, 80, 90 hours a week of actual work. And then going to school. But it worked out nicely in a sense because, again, most of the time when I was at school or at Tech, I was working as a flight medic too, right? So I was able to actually get a lot of schoolwork done while we're sitting there waiting for a flight.
That makes sense. Yeah,
So it was a nice blend for that. So it's not like an 8 to 5 job that you're having.
Well, and it probably kept
you
you on track, right? I mean, I know with the Lubbock or Tech as a school that people go for other reasons outside of academic reasons, right? So they probably
sports.
Exactly. That's what I was alluding to, football. But no, I appreciate the fact though that you had that experience. We got to do the school simultaneously. Got to go to the school that you wanted to go to. Was there this moment though? Was there this epiphany when you're like, I need to get out of this career, or what? Was there a point where you thought, this is too much?
Well, for me, I don't want to say it was a point it was too much, but there were certain things that were happening in the my career and just working as a clinician that started having an impact on me. And it's one of those things where I was just like, I knew there had to be some change out there and something different to really solve this issue. I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't really know how to look for it either, at that time. One thing that, really always bothered me is I saw people making decisions, right, on their health care, whether they can afford that transport or not. And we're not talking about just lower income. I mean, we're talking middle class, upper middle class, and even like more of your wealthy clients are like, I don't want, we can't afford this.
So they're still making a cost-benefit analysis decision of like, should I take an ambulance or should I not?
Big time.
And
unfortunately, too many times there was a bad outcome as a result of that, right? And, just imagine this. I was 20 years old at the time. We get called to this house, and the wife's called us because the husband's having chest pain. We get there. He didn't want to go. I was like, well, I talked to him, hey, let's put on the monitor. Let's just kind of see what's going on there first. Sure enough, he's having a full-blown heart attack, a full-blown, MI. Trying to tell him, hey, you need to go to the hospital. We can't afford the ambulance. We can't go, this and that. And I was like, it's like, sir, you really need to go. And I could see him starting to get agitated and really didn't want to worsen it, because of the stress level increasing. And of course, we can't make him go because that's kidnapping. Honestly, I don't really feel like going to jail.
Fair enough.
For that, right? So what we end up doing is, you get like a refusal or no transport.
So it's like a document or something you have to sign?
Yeah, it just releases us of liability. Is the big thing behind it, right? And I just strongly encourage, hey, just get your wife to take you if you're not going to take us because you're having a heart attack. And he's like, well, I'll see if I get better. I'm like, sir, I was like, I can't make you go. I said, but I strongly advise you to go. And, I said, just please go for your family. That's the last thing I said to him. Less than 30 minutes later, we get called back.
Called back to his house?
Back to his house. Open the door. Right by the front door, he's laying on the floor. His 16-year-old son's doing CPR.
Jesus.
And I can't say that we transport him, he would have lived. But he sure as hell would have had a fighting chance.
At the probability obviously increased. Because, when a critical situation with a heart attack like that, you said full-blown like a myocardial infarction.
Exactly.
Right? So that's, minutes or seconds obviously could make a difference. So this gentleman made a decision to not go for financial reasons. Possibly, right, his demise was a result of that choice.
Right.
And I can't imagine, like, what does that do to your psyche, knowing, like, the only thing that you couldn't do was just convince him to go in a timely fashion? Like, how do you mentally cope with that?
You know, it was very difficult, really, to kind of understand, hey, why are people making these decisions?
Yeah.
Especially because, I mean, I was younger, right? You know, especially
How
at this
old
time.
were you at this time?
I was about 20 years old.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, dude, go to the hospital if you need to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
You know, figure out everything later.
Yeah.
Again, because you're younger, so you don't really worry about that financial piece.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't have a family I was taking care of or anything like that either. And so that just wasn't on my forefront of my mind. But I saw it happening more and more. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I knew there had to be some solution out there.
Yep.
And something to really create some kind of where people can have that peace of mind, right? And get the care that they need when they need it, whether it's by ground ambulance, air ambulance, however.
Well, I can't tell you how many times, and I know yours sometimes is a benefit, an insurance benefit, and not, and we'll get into that in a moment. But I can't tell you how many people have sat on the couch with me, never intending to get into employee benefits or never intending to get into insurance, but there was some sort of catalyst, right? There was some event, loss of a parent, loss of a spouse, or just growing up and seeing something happen in the medical field that they go, well, clearly there's a problem.
Right.
I'm going to lean into figuring out how I could be a part of solving this. For you, obviously, it was the financial equation of that emergency transportation and recognition, at least, that this is broken. Exactly. So what is out there instead to fix it? So when did you finally make the determination, I'm going to leave this field and seek out a solution instead?
Well, so after I finished tech, for my undergrad, I went and got my master's.
Okay.
Just wasn't quite sure what I was going to be doing with that at that point, right? So I ended up doing business development for an air medical company. Really enjoyed, doing all that. Then we got bought out by another company. And unfortunately, I was one of those that was a victim of that acquisition.
Okay.
And so just basically on tenure,
Yep.
right? And so at that point, I was like, I can't find a job. This is when we're in the recession. And just couldn't find a job. I was an overqualified paramedic.
Okay.
And I was like, come on, guys. I was like, I can still be a medic if it doesn't hurt anything. But finally got a one position, and I was, from when I actually accepted that position, I was supposed to be doing some clinical as well as some business development.
Okay.
So I was like, cool. Well, things didn't really transpire because of other events that occurred, and I just wanted that change. So I just kept looking for different things, and a buddy of mine said, hey, why don't you apply for this job? I was like, what job? He's like, I can't tell you what it is. It's not posted yet.
Okay.
He's like, just send me your resume. I was like, just tell me what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't know what to do at this point. He's like, you trust me, right? I was like, well, yeah. So I ended up sending him my resume. He called me Saturday morning and said, hey, so I talked to this gentleman. He's going to call you on Monday. Are you working? I said, no. He's like, great. He's in town. He's going to take you to lunch. I was like, what is this for?
Yeah. Tell me what the job
what is this job for? He said, I am not going to tell you because you're going to say no right away.
Okay.
I was like, oh, crap. Here we go.
Okay.
And so sure enough, I got that phone call Monday morning, and I asked him, he's like, let's just talk about it at lunch. He said, just relax. He's like, hell, you can wear shorts if you want. I said, I really don't care.
Yeah.
I said, I just want to meet you. And as I've already talked to several people, and they spoke very highly of you.
Cool.
I'm like, this is kind of scary. What's going on here, right? And sure enough, went to lunch and ended up being a sales job.
Okay.
Never did sales before in my life.
Yeah.
And now this time I was actually living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Okay. And
this position was out back in West Texas. And so I'm like, okay. So I started trying to talk about the comp, get an idea for it. So if I remember correctly, it was like a guarantee of like 30 or 35,000, something in that ballpark, guaranteed.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay.
And I'm like, and I've never done sales before.
Yep.
I'm like, all right, well, I'm not happy where I'm at. I need a change. You know what? Screw it. I'm going to bet on myself.
I love it.
And just get after it. And what's the worst is going to happen? Because I'm not happy where I'm at right now. And so I was very fortunate. And I think a lot had to do with talking about the why.
Yeah.
Because this was a provider-specific program, which they're great. I mean, if you're transported by that provider, you're covered.
Okay.
But they also have their downfall that you have to be transported by that provider. Otherwise, you're not covered.
Okay.
So I don't know about you, but I never really planned my emergencies. right?
Yeah. No, I
And so
usually
I'm
don't
just
have
gonna
it scheduled
transport
on
me.
my calendar, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, all right, well, this is a partial solution at least.
Yeah.
And so that's what really
But did you
inspired
feel
me
though
for it.
like at least, oh, I'm onto something with this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I got to ask you though, never been in sales before. I didn't start my sales career until I was in my early 30s. What did you perceive sales to be at that point? I just want to, because I had a vast misconception about what it was.
I thought it was I thought you had to be really slick talking.
Yep.
You know, and this and that. And, you know, I'm not a public speaker.
Okay.
And I'm not one to get up in front. And you should have saw the first presentation I gave to a commissioner's court. Whew.
Were you terrified?
Oh, I was terrified. I was nervous. I was sweating. I was stumbling over my own words.
Yeah.
But somehow they approved it and bought it and it covered all the residents in the entire county. And at that time, it was like one of the largest deals of the company.
So you had immediate kind of financial success to prove
Exactly.
the concept too, which I think is always good. Like I was able to, I think when my sales career stop loss, I was able to sell a case, right, and an employer in like the first 3 months. And they hired me on in September or October. And like, you're probably not going to sell anything because everything's 1-1 and you're kind of missing the boat. So don't have any expectations. But I was able to land one and go, oh, okay. So that's how you do that. Maybe I'm not, maybe I could do this. But I think it's good when you have that first win. It just sort of says, okay, like relax now. This is how it works. You get that early win just gives you a little bit of confidence to continue in your career. But I was the same as you. I thought slick talking, had to manipulate people or trick them into buying. And I'm like, do I want to do that? And then I discovered very quickly that was a total misconception of the industry.
Yeah. For me, the big thing is about relationships.
Yep.
It's develop those relationships, develop the trust, and just create value in the process.
Okay.
And so, just like we're sitting here talking, I mean, that's how I approach a lot of meetings and do that. Now, if I have to give a formal presentation, overview, I can do that. But I prefer just to go, grab a drink with somebody. Or go grab a lunch.
Yeah.
And, and talk about family, talk about sports, whatever it may be. And so actually some of my closest friends now in the industry, we may have some business with them, we may not.
Yep.
But it's developed a true partnership and friendship with. But they've actually referred me to others.
Right, so they'll refer to you, or when they need your solution, they come to you, right? And the sale's already done at that point. I'm totally with you there. I love building the relationships. I have some good friends in this, really good friends, of people that I consider friends, even though we're doing business together, which is fun, right?
Exactly.
I even approach the podcast to that degree. Is like, it's not a formal presentation of your solution. We're going to interweave it into the conversation, but it's more to get to know you. And I do want to kind of go down that route now. So if we can we move into the territory of discussing the MASA solution? So you brought me up to speed. You had this first sales job. It wasn't this, of course. So how long did you do that first sales job? I
was there roughly 3 years, and then I got the call from MASA saying, hey, MASA's been around by 40, 45 years at this point.
Did you know of them through
I've
the industry?
heard of them, but it was always more of a travel type of, solution, or they sold it through certain associations, that sort of thing, right? Okay. And they were wanting to create an employee benefit division and really take what they've had success with previously and take certain benefits out of that, what we call the platinum membership, take certain benefits out of that and create an employee benefit right? And so I thought it was brilliant and I loved it. And the great thing I loved about it is the fact that, we're talking about before, those provider specific programs. With MASA, you're covered by every provider. Okay. In all 50 states and Canada, regardless who transports you, you're receiving a benefit.
Okay, so you don't have to get lucky with who transports you.
So this was that solution that I was looking for, when I was working as a medic. And so that's really, we talk about, your why, right? Yep. And that's really where this came from there's that ultimate solution behind it. Right. Well,
and I see there's a gentleman in our industry, and I'll shout out to him, Dave Stenard. He's an underwriter for a stop loss MGU. And the only reason I bring it up is because he was an underwriter for 25 years before he got into sales about 2 years ago. He knows everything you need to know about stop loss backwards and forwards, right? So you also get to sort of talk the talk and walk the walk with the problem itself because you have firsthand experience seeing it. And you never want to sort of sell over the around fear or horror stories, but the reality is those do happen. And here's a specific example I can bring up of if a solution like what this was in place, could it have prevented something like that?
Right.
So you have that kind of position of authority of experience itself, which I think probably helps you on a daily basis in your sales career.
Yeah, I would say so. And I really think even without that personal experience that I've had, that everybody's heard of somebody being transported. Right. And, you know, for the longest time, you started hearing, I say longest, last several years, right? You started hearing these horror stories about these costs for air ambulance transports.
Yeah.
But yeah, those costs are real. Those were there. But for me, you know, I know the frequency of the ground ambulance transports and how often that happens. And to me, that was really that golden nugget piece behind it, right? And I mean, when you look at a transport cost being roughly, well, it varies greatly, but for me, let's give you an example. About 2 years ago, I was actually transported as a patient.
Okay.
And my bill was $2,200.
$2,200
to go
in ground transport.
Ground transport to go 9 miles.
Okay.
$2,200.
$2,200. And that was your response.
That was my responsibility.
What was the total bill? Do you know?
Roughly 29.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because a lot of these providers on that ground side are actually out of network.
Okay.
And depending on what study you look at, I mean, you're upwards of 85% of providers are out of network.
Are out of network.
And so even if the plan says, hey, it reimburses as if it's in network, you know, that's only how they adjudicate the claim, right? And where they apply, like the deductible to, does it apply to your out-of-network or in-network deductible, your out-of-pocket max, you know, those dollars. But the reality is the fact that that provider's still out of network.
So what is the point of a
bill.
network if 95% of the providers are out of network? Is that even a network at that point?
It's really not.
Okay.
I mean, it's really not.
It's what we call a narrow network, right?
I don't even know if you call it that.
It's a sliver. Yeah.
It's a little tiny bit.
So
and you have to get lucky, you know. And the last point on that piece real quick is that a lot of the in-network providers is because they're part of a hospital system.
Okay.
And they're owned by the hospital system. So the hospital system's billing it.
Yeah.
And so that hospital's in network with that particular insurance carrier. So therefore, the ambulance service is in network.
Okay, well that makes sense.
So that's where the in-network piece really
So that's the ground side. Is that roughly what you had to pay out of pocket? I know it's market specific. There's a lot of dynamics, but is that ballpark a pretty common patient responsibility?
It's not uncommon for us to see around $1,500.
$1,500.
I mean, sometimes you can be talking $200 or $300.
Okay.
Saw a claim from last year actually here in Texas.
Okay.
It was a transfer from one hospital to another, went about 100 miles, $17,000 for ground transport.
And that was the patient's responsibility?
That was the patient's responsibility.
$17,000 for 100 miles.
For 100 miles.
I'm
By
in the wrong
ground.
business, dude. That's,
No joke, right?
That's ridiculous. But and then obviously that goes up precipitously with the air transport, right? So what's a common kind of responsibility for air?
Well, you know, that's before I would say, hey, you can be looking at $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, with that No Surprises Act in place now, that's really tampering that down some.
Okay.
Now, the challenge, I think, with the NSA is nobody really is certain how all that's going to truly transpire and roll out. I don't know if you saw it or not, but in February of this year, the federal court is the Eastern District of Texas.
Okay.
The judge there actually ruled against part of the IDR process.
Okay. So
And
what
of course,
is that?
so but, you know, the IDR process is an important part, right, of the entire dispute
I don't
resolution.
know if I know. Oh, I don't know what IDR means. I want to make sure that is if other people
it's
don't
the
as well.
forgot the I, but it's dispute resolution.
Okay.
So it's basically how they determine, you know, what's actually going to end up getting paid
Gotcha.
by the carrier, right, and what that final allowable amount's going to be in essence. And because, you know, carriers think it's way up here, health plans think it's way down here. And so it's like, you know, where in between is that going to fall?
Okay.
And so it was basically ruled, from my understanding, that it was unfairly weighted towards the carrier side on how that's calculated and how that's figured out. And so now you have a lot of stuff just kind of pending and kind of trying to figure out. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. Something else that, you know, and this is my own personal opinion, right, that I fully anticipate probably happening is that you're looking at probably carriers are going to get more strict on what they consider a medical necessity. And so they'll say, hey, yeah, maybe you need to be flown, but it should have been non-emergent.
Okay.
Right? And you're flown because of distance, and that's the only reason why.
Okay.
And so, but it's being billed as emergent. You didn't get that pre-approval. So guess what? They deny the claim. So now as a patient, you'd be stuck with that entire bill.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, in that situation, right? You can appeal it. You probably come to some kind of agreement on something, but I mean, it's a lot of headache. It's a lot of hassle.
Especially if even if it's not emergent. I mean, okay, so presumably the person is of sound mind and body to make a decision if it's non-emergent, but in an emergent situation, right? Like, I mean, if somebody's getting flown out of necessity or they're incapacitated, I mean, you literally don't even know any of this is transpiring. Right. And then hopefully you survive, and afterwards you get stuck with a big bill as well. So I want to talk about how your kind of solution intervenes in that. So let's get into a little bit of the mechanics, if you will. So kind of identify the problem, right? Egregious charges potentially landing in the patient's lap. What does MASA do to sort of intervene or smooth out or make that more predictable for both employer and employee?
Yeah, so it really is, a lot of it's going to depend on what state that group is sitused in. Because over the last, little bit, we've come insurance in certain states versus membership. And, and part of that is actually opened up additional offerings, availabilities. So in some cases, you're looking at where we just help kind of mitigate that out-of-pocket cost by negotiating with that provider with the end goal where they're going to owe zero out-of-pocket. Right? Ultimately. Obviously, there's caveats here and there, and, like anything else, right? But then other states, it's more of an indemnity type of product. And so, or there's even some cases where it's a hybrid. So it just really depends on that state. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is really provide some kind of solution to help release some of that stress of that financial impact that one may have, from a transport.
Was the goal to attack, obviously, the employee side and maybe get it down to no out-of-pocket? What about the employer side? Is it also driving down the total cost of the claim itself as well?
Yeah, it just really depends, right? I mean, you have your self-funded groups, and we do everything from self-funded to fully insured. So you have everything in between, right? So obviously, when you're looking at your fully insured, even level funded, you're there's not much it's going to do on that. Because the plan's going to pay what it's going to pay, and that's it, right? But there's still a lot of that value, obviously, for the employee from that standpoint. When you're looking at the self-funded groups, let's take a ground ambulance transport, for example. It just really depends on what the plan's already reimbursing. Although it may not be RBP or not, let's just say they're reimbursing 300% of Medicare, the equivalent of that. So I tell you what, hey, let's reduce that exposure a little bit to the plan, make it where it's capped, where it's more predictable as well, or do a flat dollar amount, whichever way. And then at that point, what we can do is implement MASA, because normally when you cap it like that, you're shifting that responsibility to the employee, right?
Yes.
And so now with MASA in place, you're eliminating that or dramatically reducing that exposure to the employee. And so it really kind of both sides can win, right? And one thing I always like to caution just, both our partners as well as, the employers on that is don't think it's going to be a kind of a net zero or a savings overall, especially if it's going to be employer paid. But what you're doing is you're enhancing your overall benefits at the same time. And it goes even one step further is, the way I like to look at it is we're challenging the employers to think on a larger picture, right? Where so often we start thinking about, all right, how many people is on the health plan? You're making decisions on certain benefits, what to include, this or that, based on who's on the health plan itself. So a spouse or dependent may be on another plan altogether. With MASA, with the solution, it covers everybody in that family. And so even if they're not on the health plan, they're still getting this benefit. And so, we were talking earlier, right, just about like the People Keep, study that's out there, where employees are looking for a solution and they want to at least be offered some benefits. And they feel like in most cases they're not getting that from their employer.
Just not, right? So not enough choice, if you will. And so you would put this more in the kind of enhancement of the benefits realm. You said you wouldn't necessarily position this solely as hey, I'm trying to save money as an employer. Obviously it's geared towards saving employees money. That's the idea. But this is an enhancement, an enhanced offering, correct?
It's a enhanced offering. At the same time, you can help control. So it's not necessarily reduce, but you can maybe help control the out-of-pocket
a little more predictability.
Or control the plan cost.
And then so you guys do that. You also do like repatriation, right? Like, can you explain that? I'd like to understand that benefit.
Yeah. So that's a benefit that gets utilized, I think, a lot more than people realize. Because the way we have it set up is, let's say you're at a hospital more than 100 miles away from home, and something because you're traveling or whatever it may be, you get hospitalized there. We can actually get you, and you're going to be hospitalized for an extended period of time. We can get you transported back to a hospital closer to home. And so think about this: how many how many employees have kids off to college, or kids that play club sports, right? And they travel all the time, or they go on family vacations, weekend getaways to fishing trips, hunting trips, you name it, because we're only talking 100 miles. And if you think about it, that's almost going from one side of the DFW to the other, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's something that, again, it's a benefit that can get utilized a lot more. And I think it's just one of those also that gets overlooked at the same time.
So repatriation doesn't necessarily mean back in country. It can just mean back into your local locale, right?
Exactly.
Or your home. Okay. Do you have like example, you're saying sports, but I mean, maybe a situation that you see pretty commonly where that would be a really useful benefit for somebody? Like a specific example of that was something you saw happen, or?
Yeah. So this actually happened during COVID, right?
Okay.
We had a member up in Denver.
Okay.
It was hospitalized up there, and she was getting where she was getting better, but trying to get back home. And so we were actually able to help arrange a transport to get her back to a hospital, a facility in the Amarillo area where she's from.
And is that a flight, or is that a ground? Or
man, it just really depends on what's the most appropriate means, right? So if you're talking about a very large distance, we can arrange a flight to make that happen. If it's typically, if you're talking less than 100 miles, it's probably going to be a ground ambulance.
Okay.
Because by the time you arrange the flight and all that happens, they could already been there by ground.
And if I'm that person, right, how do I know this benefit exists to me? I mean, is it something that's communicated to me at open enrollment? I've made a choice to purchase it, and then, like, do I have an ID card? How do I know to even access it in an emergency style situation like this?
So when specifically with the repatriation benefit, that's in that type of scenario, all you have to do is, well, first of all, the way it works, mechanics, is you just call us. We have a whole dispatch transport center that's staffed, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. Because, we have members traveling all over the world. So it really depends on what level of membership you choose, depending on what that coverage area is. But when we're looking at just how to use that, all they have to do is just call us.
Okay.
Whether it's the hospital call us or the member call us, somebody just let us know. Then we start getting all the information, gathering it, and we can arrange that transport, accordingly, right?
And the same would apply in an international situation as well, right? Okay. Obviously, the logistical challenges are a lot more difficult.
It's a little more there.
Yeah, it's a little more there than going 100 miles. But that's something I never really consider, right? I mean, I've traveled overseas before, for soccer tournaments and stuff like that. Of course, going all over the country when I was younger, you never consider, well, what happens if I got hurt here? How do I get home?
Exactly.
It's not something I even think about today, right? But I imagine it's a pretty useful benefit. But just like any type of benefit, you don't think about it until you need it, and you want to make sure it's not too late. So are you guys packaging these solutions collectively? Did they get purchased on their own? Like, how does that work?
So within an employer group, it just really depends on what's going to be the best solution for that employer group. And that's something that we pride ourselves into, is really taking a consultative-based approach, whether it's directly with their broker, partner, or if it's with the group directly, through the broker, however that may be, is that, I personally like to learn a little bit more about the group and get a little more details, about it. And then we try to figure out the best solution to kind of move forward, right? I mean, of course, everybody would love to get employer paid. You don't have to worry about it. You capture 100% and move on, right? But the reality is it's not always the best for that particular group in that situation for employer paid.
Okay.
And so in those type of situations, is that, hey, maybe you contribute half of it for those that want to enroll, right? So if you really think about it, right, instead of, say, $14 a month for the family, they contribute half at $7. How many more people are going to buy it if it's $7?
Yep.
You're going to get a very, very high participation rate on that. And, it's one of those things that's kind of like, in your essence, really almost kind of saving the company money at the same time too.
When is this a product that gets underwritten, or is it fairly static pricing?
So it's pretty static for the most part. It's historically where it was a fixed rate completely. Last year we've had more kind of flexibility, especially on the employer paid side.
Okay.
Doing different things and just working with our partners. We truly like to develop those true partnerships. So we've done different things here and there for the partners. Again, some of the states though where we're more insurance, We have a lot more restrictions at this point,
Sure.
For it, because it just got the insurance kind of, rating, for lack of a better way of putting it. But over time, we think that's going to evolve a little bit. But
when outside those challenges, is there a situation where it's just like not a good fit, right? I mean, we're both in sales, right? We know sometimes we talk to a prospect, and the more you dig, you realize, well, that's probably not what you need. Like, are there situations or industries or that it's not a good fit for?
So, it's an interesting question. Because when you're looking at most health plans, there's going to be some exposure to the employee, right? Some form or fashion.
Yeah.
Right? Now the question is what that degree of exposure is. So if you're just looking at the surface and they don't have, they don't want to, say, maybe do any kind of plain, amendments to the language or plain language amendments, that there may be it can maybe bring a little question and say, hey, is this really the best offering?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, in most situations, if they have that rich of a plan, they can do some planning.
Fair enough.
They can do amendments here and there to
Yeah.
really try to make it more predictable, really protect it, and then at the same time implement this benefit where it helps eliminate that. And the other thing, again, to kind of keep in mind is, especially when you start seeing those rich plans, the spouse and dependents a lot of times have to be on another plan altogether.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so with MASA, now you're also covering the spouse and the dependents.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when we do look at claims experience, we have to keep that in mind that, this may be employee only covered here. And if they're married and have kids, what plan are they on?
Yeah, that makes
What
sense.
does that look like? Because that claims experience is not going to show up on this report.
Well, how do you see
So-
the future of this evolving? You mentioned No Surprises Act, and I want to make sure we're conscientious of your time here. I'll kind of wrap it up. But so future of this space, right, in particular, what has changed over the last few years? How did COVID impact that? And then No Surprises Act, if it plays out as expected, how do you think your industry is going to evolve a little bit?
Well, so, for us, just really that latter part, it hasn't really had an impact on us because, again, our big thing is talking about that ground ambulance transport, right? Because it happens so often. Statistically, it's 25 to 30 million people are treated by EMS each year.
25 to 30, so about
25 to
10% of the
30.
population almost?
Exactly.
Oh, wow. I
Now,
didn't realize it was that much.
granted, when you really break it down, that's the frequency, right? So obviously sick people are transported a little bit
More
more.
often. Yeah, that makes
That's
sense.
sort of thing. But the reality is something that happens on a very frequent basis, right? And so and I always try to keep this perspective out there that, you're looking at 55 times more ground ambulance transports than air.
55 times?
55
Okay.
times more statistically. And so it's kind of one of those things like, all right, so, is this really impacting us, the NSA, with the No Surprises Act? Because it's not the majority of our claims. The majority of our claims are at the ground side.
Okay.
And I think that's why we see, say, in the Metroplex, we have a lot of large clients, specifically some school districts and that sort of thing. They're offering MASA and have for several years now. They're not worried about being flown. They're worried about that ground ambulance they see every day.
The 25
Right.
a year that happen on the
And-
ground side. Yeah.
Exactly. And the NSA doesn't cover ground.
Okay.
And so that's the reason their exposure is still there. And when you really start talking about your value prop kind of behind it, independent perspective, take that $1,500 bill, patient responsibility one may have. $1,500, some people say, hey, that's not much. Whatever, I'll just pay it if it happens. But why? When you look at the cost of MASA,
Yeah.
to cover that $1,500 bill, you could be paying on MASA for 9 years to be covering that one transport.
Really?
So when you really start talking about your ROI, why would you want to expose yourself to a bill knowing it could potentially be a lot more? Could be a little bit less, but you just don't know the uncertainty there when you can have it done for a very affordable.
Yeah, there's
right, so-
I start to see some things like, DPC, there's some carve outs for like dialysis.
Right.
Like it's like, yes, the cost savings is a driver. Yes, but also the predictability of the cost itself, turning it
Right.
into more of a fixed cost versus this variable, unpredictable cost. Makes a lot of sense, right? If you know it's going to be there and you calculate that ROI like you just described, it's like, well, if I could turn it into a fixed cost, it's more predictable. Should ultimately, hopefully, the idea is to save money as well. But I can budget towards something that is predictable.
Right.
It's a lot more difficult to budget towards something that is wildly unpredictable and has a huge variation in actual costs as well. So I totally understand the argument. I'd love to dig into the math on a separate occasion because I would love to see it. I'm a finance guy by trade. But I want to ask you, has Uber shaken up your space a little bit? Because I have heard, sort of through the grapevine.
Well, medical
like,
Uber.
Yeah, but I mean, like, hey, I cut my finger. I know I need to go to urgent care, but I don't think I need an ambulance. So let me call an Uber and bleed in the back of some stranger's car instead. I mean, do you see that happening a lot?
You hear stories about it where people say, hey, I can't afford the ambulance.
Yeah.
Uber's a hell of a lot cheaper,
Yeah.
so they call Uber. Take them to the hospital.
Well, what's like the kind of do you know anything about the liability or the legal nature?
I'm sure there's all kinds of liability.
Yeah, because if I'm an Uber driver that doesn't know I'm showing up to an emergency situation, I'm just picking a person up, and all of a sudden they're holding their hand and gushing blood. You're like, what do I do as a driver in that situation? Like, I'm sure Uber has protocols and stuff like that because it happens probably more often than we might think.
Yeah, I've heard stories about it, but it kind of really makes you wonder too, doesn't it? You're like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I just say, could there be Uber Medical? Like maybe, I'm sure Uber's already working on it if it's possible. But hey, let's go and wrap things up. Well, I really appreciate your time, man, and thanks for sharing the story. But maybe closing thoughts, things to think about, a little food for thought as we get on our way.
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I appreciate the time.
Again, yeah, so, my pleasure, man.
Definitely enjoy it. Now, and for closing thoughts, man, I would say the big thing is just really think about just the value, whether, say you're a channel partner, think about the value you're creating to your client, by offering something like this, positioning something like this to them, for their clients. And then when you're looking on the employer side, the decision maker side, you're creating value to your employees by enhancing those benefits for it. And the last stat, I love stats. So
I like stats too.
The last stat
Let's finish with a stat. Let's do it.
So that People Keep study that came out said that I want to say it was 42% of people that were surveyed rather have one additional benefit than a $200 raise a month.
Really? That's interesting.
So, I mean, when you compare that to just the shortcomings based on that study, right, of what offerings are out there, I think as an industry, whether you're on the carrier side or the consultant side, that we have work to do, and so it's really finding those solutions to put in front of the clients. And when you look at a benefit like MASA, it just makes a lot of sense because everybody's exposed to a ground ambulance. It's one of those things you don't know when it's going to happen.
Yep.
And just to be able to provide that peace of mind at such a very affordable rate,
that's kind of the goal of this podcast, right? Is there's so many solutions out there, but it's almost impossible for, you said channel partners, so your brokers, right? It's almost impossible for them to be aware of everything and then be able to get the employer's attention enough to be able to describe an enhanced or a new style benefit because they're so worried about all the other fires they're trying to put out, right?
Exactly.
So like part of the reason this podcast exists is to allow this to be fleshed out over an hour, let somebody listen to it on their own time, and if it piques their interest, now they're a little bit more prepared to have a conversation about does this fit or not. But you've sort of vetted the solution out in real time rather than having to set a meeting. Do I have time for that? It's just sort of demystify a lot of the solutions that are out there, but highlight interesting stuff as well. And so I hope I was able to do that for you today, and hopefully get you some eyeballs and some earballs on your solution, man. So Will, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for sharing your story, and I hope we get a chance to hang out more soon.
Definitely.
All right, man.
Thanks, man.
True Captive believes in healthcare that is personal and insurance that isn't complicated. Check them out at truecaptive.com.